The road was empty for miles, a straight black vein running through the middle of a sleeping desert. The radio had gone quiet an hour ago, nothing but static whispering through the speakers, and even that had begun to sound like breathing. I'd been driving since sunset, following the map's thin gray line that promised a town ahead, but the further I went, the more it felt like the world behind me had dissolved into the dark. The gas gauge hovered on empty, the orange light flickering like a pulse, steady and impatient. That's when I saw it, a faint shimmer in the distance. A single light trembling at the edge of the horizon. I told myself it was a gas station. It had to be. Anything else would have meant admitting that I was alone out here. Completely and absolutely alone. As I drew closer, the light grew steadier, the outline of an old building emerging from the heat shimmer. The neon sign blinked in uneven rhythm, painting the sand in soft blue and red. The words "open 24 hours" barely legible through decades of dust. The pumps stood crooked, rust creeping up their sides like dried blood. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed was so complete it seemed alive. The air was cold against my face as I stepped out. Gravel crunched under my boots, and the smell of fuel, old, sour metallic, hung in the wind. The sign buzzed above me, each flicker throwing the station's shadow across the empty lot like a heartbeat. I told myself I didn't need to go inside, that I'd just fill the tank and leave, but my fingers moved on their own, brushing against the glass door. It swung open too easily, the bell above it giving a half-hearted ring that died almost instantly. Inside, the air was heavier, thicker, as if it hadn't moved in years. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty cans of soup, stale candy, and faded postcards of places that might never have existed. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence, and the faint smell of coffee and dust tangled in the air. Behind the counter sat an old register, its display flickering faintly, though no one stood behind it. A cup of coffee steamed beside it, the surface still rippling, as if someone had just set it down. I took a step closer. The floor creaked under my weight. My reflection in the glass of the refrigerator doors seemed delayed, moving a heartbeat after I did. I reached for the counter and froze. The $2 lying there were damp, dark at the edges as though soaked in water. Somewhere behind me, a soft click echoed, like a door gently closing. I turned, but the entrance was still open, the desert wind pushing dust across the threshold. The hum of the lights deepened, their flicker slower now, almost deliberate. Then I heard it, faint, rhythmic. The sound of footsteps in the aisles. Not quick, not cautious, just pacing. I whispered a greeting that vanished before it left my lips. The footsteps stopped, the air shifted. I could hear the hum of the lights tremble, as if the electricity itself was afraid. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on the aisle. The rows of shadows stretching longer, thicker, and then, just as I reached for the handle, the radio crackled to life. My name spilled from it, soft and distorted, spoken in my own voice. I froze. The radio hissed again, then repeated it, my name, over and over like a chant. The air around me buzzed, the lights above flashing once, twice, then dimming into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my breathing. Then, in the reflection of the door's glass, I saw a figure behind the counter, still. Tall, face lost in shadow. It didn't move, but its head tilted slowly toward me. I stumbled out into the cold night, the gravel crunching beneath my boots as I ran to the car. The wind screamed through the pumps, carrying a sound that might have been laughter. I slammed the door shut and twisted the key, the engine coughing before it roared to life. Headlights spilled across the cracked asphalt, but the station was gone, just sand, black road, and the whisper of the wind. I drove until the fuel light blinked again, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, the neon glow was still there, faint, pulsing, following me through the night. I told myself I'd find another station, a real one. But when I finally saw another light on the horizon, it looked exactly the same. Same pumps, same sign, same silence waiting inside. The rain had started without warning, thin at first, like mist that shimmered in the beams of my headlights, then heavier, until the wipers could barely keep up. It was close to midnight, and the highway had thinned to nothing but me, the rhythmic slap of rain on glass, and the faint hum of the tires against slick asphalt. I was halfway through another long-haul night drive, the kind where time stretches until it folds in on itself. Somewhere between the static on the radio and the fatigue creeping behind my eyes, I saw him. A lone figure at the side of the road, soaked through, head lowered, thumb raised. For a moment, the light caught his face, pale, uncertain, almost transparent in the downpour. Common sense said to drive on, but something else, some small, old piece of humanity, told me to stop. The brakes hissed as the car slid to a stop beside him. He opened the door without a word, dripping water onto the floor mat, and sat perfectly still, hands clasped in his lap. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft, barely rising above the hiss of rain. "Thank you. Been walking a long time." I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Where are you headed?" He told me a town I'd never heard of, north of here, maybe an hour away. The road ahead was black and endless, the rain thickening into sheets that blurred the edges of the world. We drove in silence, the sound of the engine steady and low. I risked a glance at him. His clothes looked dated, wool coat, scuffed shoes, and his eyes, when they met mine, were calm, too calm, like someone who'd made peace with something I couldn't name. The radio crackled suddenly, snapping through the quiet. The station dial spun on its own, settling into a low whisper that almost formed words. My name slipped through the static, once, then again. My grip tightened on the wheel. The man beside me didn't react. He just stared out into the rain. A bolt of lightning lit the inside of the car white for a heartbeat, and I could see through him. Not entirely, but enough that the outline of the passenger seats. Stitching was visible through his shoulder. My heart stumbled, but when I looked again, he was solid. He smiled faintly. "Rough weather," he murmured. I forced a laugh, the sound hollow. "Yeah, you could say that." The highway signs passed in intervals, each one naming the same town he'd mentioned, but the miles never seemed to change. The gauge stayed frozen. The clock, too. I glanced at the dashboard. 12:03, it had said 12:03, for the past half hour. "You missed the turn," he said suddenly, his tone flat but absolute. I looked to the right, nothing but trees, and the flicker of a dirt road that hadn't been there a second ago. "That'll take you there." I slowed, hesitating, the headlights stretching across the wet gravel. "You sure?" I asked, but he didn't answer. When I turned back toward him, the seat was empty. The door was closed. The rain on the windshield had gone silent, though the wipers still moved. My pulse hammered in my ears as I glanced at the passenger seat, dry, spotless. A faint chill rolled through the air, smelling faintly of smoke and rain. I pulled over, stepping out into the wet silence, scanning the road. He stood about 20 feet behind the car, right where I'd picked him up, his outline framed in the glow of the taillights. He lifted his hand again, thumb raised, expression blank, waiting for a ride. I called out, my voice lost to the wind. He didn't move. Slowly, I got back into the car, shut the door, and drove on. The rain returned as suddenly as it had stopped. The radio whispered my name one more time, softer now, almost kind. Hours later, when the first hint of dawn touched the sky, I saw a green sign ahead, "Welcome to Havers Creek." My stomach twisted. That was the town he'd said. But the sign was old, rusted through, and half buried in the mud. Beneath the name, a smaller plaque read, "Population 0." The road curved gently left, and there he was again, standing at the bend, thumb raised, waiting in the rain. The desert stretched endlessly, an ocean of sand and silence beneath a bruised purple sky that never seemed to end. The world had gone still, no movement, no birds, not even the faint hum of passing cars. My gas gauge had been flirting with empty for almost half an hour, and the warning light blinked like a heartbeat in the dark. The last town was 40 miles behind me, a cluster of rusted buildings long forgotten by maps and men. The highway shimmered with mirages that twisted in the heat, even though the sun had already sunk behind the dunes. My tires hummed against the cracked asphalt, the only sound breaking the weight of the silence. And then, through the wavering air, I saw it, a faint flicker of neon light pulsing on the horizon. Weak but insistent, I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. The sign glowed in broken fragments, half-dead letters forming the word motel. Relief washed over me. Maybe luck still existed out here, in this wasteland of sand and ghosts. I pulled off the road, the crunch of gravel loud in the morning. The headlights swept across a squat building, sun-bleached and peeling, with 6 rooms lined. In a row and a crooked palm tree, bent toward the ground, like it was tired of standing. The air smelled of dust and old gasoline. A flickering sign buzzed overhead, lighting the cracked pavement in a tired red glow. I noticed something strange. No cars in the parking lot. No sound of an air conditioner humming. No movement behind the drawn curtains. It looked abandoned, yet the office light was still on. The shadows it cast stretched long and thin across the lot. I stepped out, stretching my legs, the dry wind brushing against my skin like static. The moment my foot hit the ground, the world felt heavier, thicker somehow. I walked to the office, boots crunching softly, and pushed open the door. A bell above it gave a weak, broken jingle, a sound that seemed too loud in the silence. Inside, the air was stale. A man sat behind the counter, pale and thin, his eyes deep in his skull, but strangely gentle. He looked up slowly, as though he'd been waiting. "Long drive?" he asked, his voice soft and rough, carrying years of dust and something I couldn't quite place, like an echo. I nodded and reached for my wallet, but his gaze never left mine. "Cash only," he said, as if I should have already known. He slid a single key across the counter. The brass was worn smooth, the tag faintly etched with the number. "He's at room 6, end of the row," he murmured, voice lowering. "Stay inside tonight. Wind gets strange after dark." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's when I heard it, the faint hum of static. It was so soft at first I thought it was my imagination, but then it grew louder. The television in the corner had turned on by itself. The screen flickered black and white, images half-formed, shadows moving behind glass, shapes bending at impossible angles. I couldn't make out any faces, but I could feel them watching. The hum deepened, vibrating in my bones. I stood up, scanning for the remote. It wasn't there. My reflection caught my eye on the TV's surface, the bed, the peeling walls, the open door, and something else. Someone was standing behind me. I left the office, the sound of the bell dying behind me. The air outside had cooled sharply, the kind of chill that didn't belong in a desert night. The neon sign buzzed louder now, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Room 6 was waiting at the far end, its door slightly open, rocking gently as if breathing. My pulse quickened. I stepped inside, and the air hit me like a wall, cold, dry, filled with the faint scent of rust and old rain. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling at the edges like dead leaves. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying though no wind stirred. I set my bag down and sat on the bed. The mattress sagged beneath me, dust rising into the dim light. I turned fast, heart hammering, but the doorway was empty. Only the creak of the neon sign outside broke the stillness. When I turned back to the screen, my blood ran cold. The TV was showing me, sitting on the bed, staring at the screen. But in the image, there was a tall, thin silhouette behind me, still, featureless, rippling like heat on asphalt. I lunged forward and yanked the plug from the wall. The picture vanished instantly, but the hum didn't stop. It grew louder, crawling into the floorboards, rattling the glass, whispering through the air vents. Whispers filled the room. Dozens of voices, overlapping, pleading, urgent, but none of them made sense. I covered my ears, but they were inside my head. Then as suddenly as it began, silence. The light steadied. The bulb stopped swaying. I sat down, shaking, trying to breathe. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe a trick of the heat. I leaned back on the cold mattress and stared at the ceiling. The sound of my heartbeat echoed in my ears. My eyelids grew heavy. I don't know how long I drifted before. I heard it, the knock, soft, 3 times, even. I froze, breath shallow. "Who's there?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. No answer. The knock came again, a little louder. I stood slowly, my legs trembling, and approached the door. The peephole showed only blackness. My hand shook as I turned the knob. The door swung open on its own, creaking wide to reveal nothing. The parking lot was empty. The air outside was utterly still. But the neon sign at the far end now glowed bright red, each letter sharp and alive. It no longer read motel, it said welcome back. A chill ran through me so deep it felt like my bones turned to ice. I stumbled backward, my heel hitting the table. The key rattled violently, spinning in circles until it clattered flat. When it stopped, the brass tag no longer said room 6. It said checkout 1974. I stood there, unable to move, my mouth dry. I turned toward the mirror on the wall, and there he was, the clerk from the front desk. His reflection stood behind me, smiling faintly, though no one was actually there. His eyes glowed faintly in the glass like embers under ash. The light bulb above flickered once, then again faster and faster, until the room was strobing with flashes of shadow and shape. The air filled with that low hum again, vibrating through the walls. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, like the air itself was holding me in place. Then the whispers returned, layered, softer now, as though coming from far away. A woman's voice among them said, "You shouldn't have stayed." The neon outside buzzed louder, the sound swelling into a sharp whine. I ran to the door, but it slammed shut before I could touch it. The key on the floor slid on its own toward the crack under the door, vanishing into the dark. My breath came in ragged bursts as the lights dimmed to a single pulse, from the TV still unplugged, but glowing faintly. The screen flickered to life one last time, showing the motel sign outside. The letters shifted slowly, forming one final word. Goodbye. The light snapped off, plunging me into blackness. And then, for the first time, I heard the wind outside. It wasn't whistling. It was whispering, repeating the same word over and over. Stay. I closed my eyes and waited for dawn that never came. Somewhere outside, the neon buzzed one last time, and the world went still again. The first time the radio went silent, I didn't think much of it. Out here, in the empty miles between the mountain ranges, dead zones were common, small voids where the world seemed to fold in on itself. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, the kind that hums behind your eyes. The world shrinks when you lose signal. No music, no voices, no proof that anything exists beyond the headlights. I'd been on the road for hours, tracing a forgotten route through the high desert terrain, where the sand met the stars and the air felt thin enough to break. When static swallowed the last station, it felt less like losing a broadcast, and more like something had decided to turn the sound off entirely. I reached for my phone. No bars, no signal, just that blinking outline trying and failing to connect. The little spinning circle that looked more desperate with every turn. The air outside felt heavier now, thicker somehow, pressing against the glass. My dashboard clock flickered between 11:59 and 12 hour, then froze there, stuck in perpetual midnight. I glanced up. The sky had gone completely black, no moon, no stars, only the road stretching endlessly ahead like a crack through an infinite wall. My high beams cut across scrub brush and rocks that seemed to shift shapes in the dark. Then a sign appeared through the dust, a half-buried green one. The letters barely visible. Ridge Point, 12 miles. The name meant nothing, but in the middle of nowhere, 12 miles might as well have been salvation. I gripped the wheel tighter, the steering leather cold under my hands. That's when the static changed. It wasn't random anymore. Beneath the hiss there was rhythm, short bursts, pauses like breathing. A pulse. I leaned closer, turning the volume down, then up again. The pattern repeated 3 times. Then a voice, faint, fractured, buried in the noise, broke through. Turn back. I froze. It wasn't just distortion. There were syllables, emotion, almost pleading. Hello? I said into the empty car, my voice trembling more than I wanted to admit. Who's there? The radio crackled, popped, and went silent again. Only the sound of the tires filled the space, soft, repetitive, grounding. I shook it off. Maybe CB chatter. Maybe interference from something old left out here to rot. 10 miles to Ridge Point. I pressed the gas a little harder. The darkness began to feel thicker, like fog made of static. The road rippled faintly in the headlights. Then suddenly the beams flickered once, twice, and the world ahead shifted. The highway no longer looked right. The lines curved in strange arcs, doubling back into shapes that made no geometric sense. My reflection in the windshield blinked half a second late. I told myself it was exhaustion, but deep down, a colder thought whispered, "You're not driving through the desert anymore. You're driving through something else." Then, out of nowhere, another voice emerged from the static, softer, clearer. A woman this time, her tone more warning than threat. "You shouldn't be here." My chest tightened. I stared at the radio as if it could explain itself. "Who are you?" I whispered. No response. Just the low, steady hum of an ancient transmission continuing without origin. Then something moved across the road ahead. Quick, human-sized, silent. I slammed the brakes, the tires screaming against asphalt. The car stopped inches before the figure. My hands shook against the wheel. I blinked once and it was gone. Only dust and faint ozone hung in the air. I checked the mirrors, breath caught in my throat. Nothing in front, nothing beside. But in the rear view, the figure stood behind the car, motionless, too still. Its face obscured by shadow, its outline fuzzing like bad reception. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, heart hammering. The radio exploded with overlapping voices, male, female. Distorted echoes layered over each other like a storm of whispers. Turn back, stop, stop, stop. Each word warped until they all merged into one, my own voice, calm and hollow. You're almost home. The words chilled me more than the cold air pouring through the vents. I looked down. The GPS flickered back to life for half a second. My route was gone. The blue line ended in a spiral. No road beyond. But I kept driving. The desert around me stretched endlessly, yet it felt as though I wasn't moving at all. Then, through the mist, faint lights appeared, blinking red and white. Relief flooded me. Civilization, a signal tower, anything. But as I drew closer, relief turned to dread. It wasn't a tower. It was a cluster of twisted metal spires. Dozens of antennas bending in impossible directions. Some hovered slightly above the ground, humming with low energy. The air around them vibrated. The sand pulsed faintly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. I rolled the window down and immediately regretted it. The sound wasn't wind. It was whispering. Thousands of voices beneath the hum, speaking words I couldn't quite catch. The radio screamed again, the kind of static that makes your teeth ache. Then crystal clear I heard myself. You've reached the end of transmission. I froze. That was my voice. The one I'd used to record a voice memo earlier that day. The same cadence, the same breath. I slammed the power button, but the radio didn't turn off. Every channel now played variations of my own speech, half-formed phrases, muttered thoughts, things I'd said alone in the car hours ago. Keep going. You're fine. It's just static. It's just static. The mirrors began to shake. My reflection didn't match my movements. It turned its head before I did, lips whispering words I couldn't hear. I opened the door, stepping out into the night. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was dense, humming, alive. The ground beneath me pulsed faintly, syncing with my heartbeat. The antennas above me glowed brighter, red lights multiplying until they painted the sand in shifting color. Then my phone buzzed. One notification, signal found. I looked down. The screen showed a live video feed. Me, standing beside the car, filmed from somewhere high above. My reflection on the glass of the phone blinked differently from me. I dropped it. The screen went black. The hum stopped. The red lights went dark. And for the first time since the static began, I realized how loud the silence was. The kind of silence that makes the world feel hollow. I turned back toward the car, but the road behind me wasn't there. Only shifting sand and broken signs pointing in opposite directions. The radio inside the car clicked once more, and my own voice whispered one last line, softer now, almost a sigh. Transmission complete. I stood there for what felt like hours, listening to the nothing. Then with shaking hands, I turned the key. The engine coughed to life. I drove forward, not because I believed I could find a way out, but because stopping meant listening again. As the desert stretched endlessly ahead, the static began to creep back in, slowly, faintly, rhythmically. It sounded almost like breathing. And beneath it, so soft I almost missed it, came the same voice as before, mine, saying something new. Welcome back, listener. The radio clicked. The sky above flickered like a dying screen, and then the transmission began again.